good evening, whatever part of the world you're in, we welcome you to Changes, Conversations Between Authors. I'm Sally Ember, EDD, and Changes Conversation Between Authors is an almost weekly Google Plus Hangout on Air that's also simulcast on YouTube, in which I, an author, talk with other authors, one at a time usually, about whatever we want, as long as it's PG-13. And today is August 27th, 8th, or 9th. Which day is it today? 26th. 26th. Today is August 26th. And like 2015 is the year. I get my timelines mixed up, as you know, from reading my books. And today's guest is MP, also known as Michael McVey. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you very much, Sally, for having me. Really excited to be a part of this.
So, Michael, you are a cross-genre and cross-different lengths of writing writer,
Yes.
meaning you don't just write novels, you also write short stories, and you don't just write science fiction, you also write fantasy.
Yes.
And a lot of people are not that. So how did you decide to spread out, so to speak?
I feel like when I started writing that I wanted to write stories that I haven't seen, stories I've always wanted to read. And mainly I've always said that writing is more important for you to write the story that you want and what excites you. And sci-fi and fantasy both excite me. And it's just it blends naturally together, and a lot of times I can have stories that involve both fantasy and sci-fi, and sometimes I just have to write a story that's fantasy or sci-fi or neither really, but for the most part it's fantasy and sci-fi.
And then you've written a lot of short stories, but this is your first novel?
Yes, this is my first novel. I'd never written a novel to completion before. It's a very educational process. You learn a lot as a writer when you move from short stories to novels. There's the plus sides and the downsides to everything, and it's the same thing with writing novels and short stories. Going back to writing short stories after writing novels is very difficult because you have to tell the same story but in less words, and you have to tighten everything up, and you can't be as descriptive as you would be for a novel.
Right, exactly. And then some people would say that it's much easier to write a short story, and some people would say that's the hardest form because it's very restrictive.
Oh,
So yeah. I guess it depends on what's easier for each writer.
Well, I mean, obviously you know Ernest Hemingway and his less is more theory, which a lot of people, subscribe to. But have you heard the challenge that he got to write the shortest story?
The 6-word story?
Yep.
Go ahead. Tell everybody what it is in case they don't know.
Well, he was in a bar and they were talking about less is more. And Ernest Hemingway has always been a really direct writer. And they got in a big argument about it. And Hemingway guaranteed he could write a story that was only 6 words long. And the story was for sale, baby shoes never worn. And
Right.
And it's really kind of a morbid little short story, but kind of also a very funny story to tell.
Well, and I think it's funny to me because Ernest Hemingway was the opposite in his life as he was from his writing. He was an excess person in his life. He had lots of lovers and drank a lot, and he stayed up late, and he spent a lot of money, and he did about everything you could do to excess in his life. And then in his writing, he was parsimonious and very succinct. So maybe that was the only place in his life he had any discipline.
Well, it's funny because it's a focus thing, and a lot of times it's where he could put his focus. And at that time too, there wasn't a lot of knowledge about more mainstream mental problems that people may have now, like what is called bipolar now. Wasn't really something people were able to identify, and I think Ernest Hemingway may have fallen into that category. Very violent outbursts and a sad man, and Mark Twain was the same way, especially towards the end of his life. And it's
Yeah, you make a good point, Michael. I think that a lot of undiagnosed mental illnesses have occurred in people whose lives we know a lot about, which means
yeah,
they've probably occurred in millions of other people whose lives we don't know anything about,
mhm,
right?
exactly.
And that is really sad, and that is a lot of the time why they drink a lot or why they're so creative. They've actually shown, you asked me earlier in our green room talk, you know, where do I do the research for my writing and
Yes.
my science fiction series, the Spanner series. And I do all my research on science websites and science magazines and science books because I'm fascinated. And one of the things I'm fascinated by is brain, neurological and biological brain science. And one of the things that I keep up with in neurological and biological brain science is the relationship among DNA, heritage, environmental factors, and genetic or what you might call congenital physiological factors in mental health and mental illness, and the effect of hormones and other kinds of nutritional influences and all these different things that can pile in on a person and either help them or harm them and create what we call the trigger for the epigenetics, the way that our genes express ourselves. And one of the things they just discovered recently, not only do these things run in families, which they've known for a long time, but they didn't want to admit it, but they also found out that the genes or the DNA strands that are very closely connected to creativity are right inside and twinned with certain kinds of mental illness, what we call mental illness. It's debatable whether it's always mental illness, like bipolar, like depression, like schizophrenia. And in fact, some physicists are now saying that people who hear voices and see people who aren't there are visiting other timelines and can't tell the difference.
Well, you know,
The multiverse theory, you know, that they're sort of having bleed through in a way that most of us aren't, which is what I say happens to some of my characters too.
yeah, I was going to say that's a big part of your book series, and it's funny because I've been hearing a lot about sleep paralysis and how a lot of times what a lot of people consider to be contact with alien or demons while they're in their bedrooms trying to sleep. It's a lot of times it's been diagnosed as sleep paralysis, but of course it could be originally what it was the whole time. It could be aliens. I mean, who knows? It could be something that only they perceive and people around them don't perceive at all. But it's always interesting to see science and meeting up with problems that we face on a daily basis. What websites do you normally go to for your science research? Like, which one would you say is your favorite?
Times.
That's okay. That's okay. I was trying
I
to.
hope you've continued to entertain everybody.
I did my best. I'm really bad at the one directional thing, but
Where did we leave off now? I don't want to backtrack.
oh well, we were let's see, where were we? We've just been
What I left
talking.
off with when I got kicked out was you were talking about sleep paralysis. So you must have gone on from there.
Oh, I was just saying that it's always good to see science meeting up with stuff today and trying to solve the issues and the problems. It's always interesting to see what they think everything is and trying to fix everything.
Okay, and where did you go from there? What did I miss?
Oh, that was about it. And then I realized that you'd froze up on me and I dumped out and jumped back in so I could.
Oh, you're not supposed to do that. When I get kicked out, you're supposed to stay there and entertain people.
Well, I came back
Don't
immediately.
do that.
Okay. Well, I'll do my best.
Okay, well, I had many more difficulties because it crashed my entire computer. So I'm sorry, everybody. All right, let's go back to our actual topic because that's much more interesting than my computer problems. So what we were talking about as well were the relationships among our writing and our research and science and all those different ways that things work. So how do you incorporate science and other kinds of topics in your writing?
Well, generally it's for me stumbling across an idea or when I'm reading something else and it sparks an interest in me, and I'm somebody that when I hear something on NPR or I see something on the news and it really interests me and I'll look into it a little bit further. And then my mind starts to just kind of like go on its own and think of different ideas for it. And it's been the way. That's how I've been pretty much my whole life, is just constantly researching stuff that interests me and
Right.
finding new individuals on it.
So I don't know if you had a chance to read my blog post that was all about how I incorporate my research into my writing. Did you get to read that?
Yes, I did. It was very, very interesting. And you were talking about typewriters and
Well, I went back
moving
and
up.
talked about how the whole way that people used to write was so different.
Oh yeah.
I didn't even start with, plume pens and wet ink, but I went
Mhm.
back to manual typewriters and kind of brought us forward. But the other part I wanted people to know about was that I find things online and I collect them in folders, and then I look at them and put them right into my writing stream so that I
Mm.
remember what the ideas were that I wanted to incorporate. And then as I incorporate them, I delete them from my drafts.
That's
So I
very
don't,
smart. I should be doing
yeah,
that,
so
but
I
I'm
don't
not.
use their words.
Well, there's always times that I'm like in a bookstore, like at like a secondhand bookstore, and I'm perusing different sections, and I stumble across an interesting book, and I look at it, and it makes me think a lot about the stuff that's going on in it. Um, and for some reason, sometimes I don't buy the book. I just think it's really interesting. I set it down, and then I walk away, and then a few days later, I go back hoping it's there, and it's never there. I should always remember
Really?
that. Yeah. It's very weird. And we're talking like metaphysical section, like very odd topics. I think this one was a book on the magic of mirrors. And it wasn't just, new age uh, ideology of mirrors. It was more um, like old world views on mirrors, uh, how mirrors have been perceived to be magical throughout history and stuff like that. It was a whole book on the magic of mirrors, and I could not find it again. And it was really a sad down day for me. So I was
All
really
right, well,
looking for it.
everybody who's watching this now or in the future, if you know anything about how to find that book,
Yes, please
please
let me
get in
know.
touch with Michael. And the best way to get in touch with you is,
You can reach me over at mpmcvey.com. There's a contact section. You can always leave me a message and let me know about a book on magic of mirrors, or if you just have anything you want to say, you can always reach me there.
so that's mpmcvey.com.
Yep.
And you can find his writing and his photographs that go with his short stories. We're going to look at those in a minute, and about his novel, and also that he's going to be at a world convention of Comic-Con that's happening in Ohio, which we'll talk about later. But I want to go back to another topic because we have a visitor this morning whose show I've been encouraged to watch often. Her name is Melita Noel Cantu, and she's done a lot in the areas of sexual orientation and gender diversity for children and young adults, and just went on this whole tour where she and her family went from Texas all the way up to northeastern Canada and back down to Texas, and delivered books to libraries on those topics, donated them, found authors and other sources for donations for the books, and then incorporated that into their travels so that they went to different libraries with their kids and sometimes with their husband when he could be there, and they would donate the books. And then they visited St. Louis on their way back, which I was excited about because I hadn't met them in person yet, and donated some books to a library here.
That's
And
really
that was just so cool. So you and I, Michael, we're talking about how does a male write about female characters, or how does anyone write about characters that aren't like ourselves? And I think
Yes.
Melita would be very interested in that topic. And something you said before we started really stuck with me, because you said, well, your friends or readers were complaining because a lot of your characters were straight, white, and male. And your reply to them was, well, that's what I am. How am I supposed to write about anything else? And then I said to you, well, how are you writing from the point of view of an elephant? Because you do that in your
Yes.
story, and I don't
Well, yeah.
understand.
Well, it's more that I don't um honestly I don't really like mention skin pigmentation in writing characters. Uh Gender is kind of something you have to assign to characters otherwise it might be a bit confusing when you're having dialogue go on. And obviously a lot of names are going to give away gender anyway, especially modern, like, actual names like David and Sally and things like that. But it's more like they don't complain. It's more like they just wonder why it is that you write this, as you write most of your characters based on you, with your Spanners series. A lot of the characters I write tend to be like myself. A lot of them wear glasses. A lot of them are, white males with, brown hair. But I really don't like to assign, ethnicity to characters unless I feel that it's important to the story. I'd like to, for the most part, in my mind, I see them as being like me, but I try my best not to paint them a certain way. I'd like the readers to be able to read a story and discern them to be however they want to be. It makes it
Well, I
easier
think a
for
lot
readers.
of writers have that same issue.
Mhm.
And I certainly am one of those writers who doesn't always mention the skin tone or ethnicity of every character. And many people would say that that is a function of white privilege, that we don't mention it because to us it isn't important to mention it. But a lot of people would say it's very important, especially people who aren't white, or, for example, in a Chinese country, people might not, as the writer, mention that everyone's Chinese. But then when they do mention that someone isn't Chinese, everybody notices. And so it's all about what is prevalent around you and what do you not mention. And that's the privilege of not mentioning the majority, that you don't have to mention the assumption. But we should make them all mentioned so that we level the playing field. So instead of presuming that all animals are male, have you ever looked at children's literature? There is a ridiculous presumption of the masculinity of male characters, even when they're cartoons,
Well,
even when they're not real.
I have to tell you though, chipmunks are a very masculine animal. So I mean,
It's ridiculous. How do you get babies then?
oh, true. It's very true. Well, I mean, but to be honest, for the most part, when parents are reading those books to their children, they're not really talking about reproduction or
That doesn't matter. I changed the gender of every character in my child's books as I read to him, just to try to level the playing field. I made every male character female, unless it was impossible. I made every non-distinct character female. Whenever we would drive around and we would see people in construction uniforms, police uniforms, firefighter uniforms, I would say, look at her. Look at her up in that cherry picker truck. Look at her on that fire truck. Just to even it out, because otherwise all he would ever hear about is men.
It's very true. It's interesting. I've heard recently a radio ad for a divorce lawyer, and it really caught me off guard because it talked about the business side. If you have a business and you're getting divorced, and then it said, we're here for the men. And I was like, well, not all businesses are owned by men. So it was a very weird thing to hear on the radio, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, especially in the 2000 teens. That's just unconscionable and ignorant of that particular ad agency or individual to put that out there like that. That would make me never use that attorney. Just that right there.
Very true.
And Melita was commenting on something we were talking about before I got kicked out, which is that she was interested in the intersection between creativity and quote unquote mental illness as well. And the comments aren't showing up. We're having a lot of problems with our hangout today, technologically speaking. But thank you for your comment, Melita, and for being here today. And I want to go back to what we were talking about. How do writers write about characters that aren't like us? And again, I want to just challenge you because it seems to me that you made an easy leap to write from the point of view of an animal, but you're still hesitating to write or feel like you don't have the authority to write from the point of view of a Black woman or a lesbian or a child that isn't you or an older person who isn't your parents. And why is that? Why would you write from the point of view of an animal, which you clearly are not?
Well,
and then not write about humans.
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. For the most part, I mean, I have written some short stories. One was from the main character was an elderly woman, and I do have characters. One of the characters in Plot on Sleepless Giant is actually somebody that suffers from a mental illness or two. He's a very odd character. Uh, and of course, I write from the point of view of an elephant. But it's all third person, and it's I kind of dip into their minds a bit when I'm in their part of the story. Um, but it's not that I'm not willing. It's just it's something that I haven't done yet, and I'm currently working on some projects that have very strong female lead characters,
Good.
and it's interesting. It's because I want them to be strong, but I don't want them to be too too strong that they can't be identifiable with female readers. I'd like them to be like strong women like that I know in real life, but not me write. I don't want to write what I consider like a really strong man character, but make it a woman. You know what I mean? It's a
Why
very
not?
difficult. Well,
Why
no.
not?
Well, I mean, if I were to just take a character that if I were to write out something that I wrote the whole way through as if it was a man and then just change the gender,
That's
it
right.
would
Just do a group find and replace for your whole document for
just
every
find
pronoun.
he and replace
Yeah.
with she and
Yeah. Why
find
not?
him. And I don't know. I've never thought about it
You
that
should
way.
do it. You should save a draft
Mhm.
that you aren't going to keep maybe and do it and then read it out loud to yourself and find out why you're wrong or why you're right
Uh,
about doing that.
well, I guess it all depends on the content of the story. It might work out well, but
It might not matter unless the person is committing rape with their body. I don't see why any of it would matter.
she woke up earlier that morning to call her urologist. Like
Well,
something like
I'm saying if there's a
yeah.
biological issue, obviously, then you might have to change
Oh yeah,
something.
yeah.
But otherwise, I promise you
Mhm.
that feminists and readers of very strong female character comics, graphic novels, short stories, novels, any kind of depictional film and TV, they love the stories where there is no distinction made
Mhm.
between the male and female characters, except for this one is being cast as a female and
Yeah.
this one's being cast as a male. And otherwise, they're all kick-ass and they're all smart and they're all strong and they're all really tough and they're all really capable. And I think it's really important to let that happen that way because it happens like that in real life. Two women just became the first
Yeah.
Army Rangers and everybody's falling all over themselves to say how amazing that is. And I'm like, you know
It's
what's
like
amazing
yeah.
is that there weren't any before.
Yeah. That's
It's
the
not like all
real
these
side.
men are so tough and so brave and so strong when they get first into the Army. There's a bunch of wimps that join the Army. They get made into strong and tough.
Well, it was funny because when I turned 18 and had to sign up for the draft, I always thought it was unfair that it was just the guys that had to do it, and I was shocked to see that female soldiers weren't really prominent on the front line even today. Like I thought that was a very shocking thing to hear in this day and age. But
It is. It is. And the thing is, it's not a new question, as Melita's pointing out, and I wish this comment would show up. I'm trying to make it work, but it's not. I'll read it. First, she wanted to thank me for letting everyone know about her Censored to Celebrated celebration tour, where she gave all the books to those libraries in New England and northern eastern Canada and central United States, and a little bit in the southern United States. And then she said, what a great question I asked you about why can't you write as a woman? She wrote a high school thesis about gender, especially about how authors write cross-gender characters. And she gave an example of one she really liked, which was a Southern writer, Reynolds Price, a man, who wrote a novel, Kate Vidin. And to her, to Melita, he really captured the character's voice beautifully. She really appreciated his take on how this character would think, how this character would feel, what this character would do, how this character would interact. And, a lot of people say that writing is really about observation, not
it's
personal
true.
experience.
No, that's very true. But I think even when writing female characters or anything like that, I think personal experience of the writer always kind of comes into it.
Right.
It's just, because it's all on an emotional or mental level at some point. But when you read, let me ask you, because you're the best person to ask this question. To write a strong female character, what are the big pet peeves that you see when you see female characters in the lead role?
I love this question, Michael. Thank you for asking it because I have a list
I
of
can
pet
imagine.
peeves. I'm
I
not
do
going to
too.
read from it, but I'll tell you what they are.
Sure.
First one, they have these strong female characters. They're doing a great job. They're having a great life. They know how to live their life until a man comes along. And suddenly they're dropping things. They're tripping. They're forgetting. They're weak. They're afraid. They're suddenly completely incompetent because now there's this man. And he has to look better than they do in this writer's point of view. And so they make the man the one who's stronger and better and tougher. And then every now and then the female might outdo him, but that's supposed to be funny or that's supposed to be sexy, but it's temporary. The whole concept is women can't outdo men all the time because if they do, that's an anomaly or it's not romantic. And then I just want to smash those writers because they're wrong.
Well, they always, it depends. I mean, I guess a lot of times writers, especially male writers, male authors, they are constantly thinking that their readership is predominantly male. But I mean, there's a lot of women out there that read a lot of different things, and sci-fi and fantasy is a growing genre for, female readers. So it's important to remember that when you're writing anything, not to pander to one gender over the other. And it's just going to get more and more interesting as the years come along with everything coming up with gender identification and transgender and everything else that's happening.
Well, it's already been happening. It's been happening for decades. And the original seminal work on non-gender, transgender, cross-gender, changing gender is Ursula K. Le Guin. And her Left Hand of Darkness was just a masterful work. It won every award that you can win in science fiction and literature because it was so well written, but her concepts were so far ahead of her time. And she wrote this and published it in the 70s. And did you ever get to read it, The Left Hand of Darkness?
No, I have not.
She has this one concept in there called Kemmer, Kemmer, which is just brilliant. And it has to do with the idea, and biologically, I can't tell you how it would work, but it has to do with the idea that the adults on this planet who have reached the level of being able to reproduce would go into what we would call heat and what she calls Kemmer on some kind of a cyclical basis. And only during that period of time do they assume a gender. Otherwise, they're genderless. And at the time they go into Kemmer, even more interestingly, she conceived of the concept that when they become ready to reproduce, their gender identity is in relation to the other person they want to have sex with. So if this person wants to be a man and that person wants to be a woman, they each take on that role temporarily so that reproduction can occur. Not to say there aren't lesbians and gay male sexual partners, but if it's reproduction they want, one of them has to be the male and one of them has to be the female. She didn't diverge that much in that way. But then the next time they're together, they can take turns being the male and the female. And then the brilliance of this is that because everyone on the planet who's had children can be or has already been a mother, this is a planet with no warfare.
Oh.
Absolutely none, because no mother is willing to send their child into war.
That's
given a choice, we say no.
That's a pretty it's a pretty interesting story. I'm gonna have to check that out. You're gonna have to let me know where I can find that.
Oh, everywhere. It's one of the most popular science fiction novels ever written, right up there with Stranger in a Strange Land and anything else you can name. It's brilliant. And she's written other books too that are also brilliant, but that one related very much to our topic. And then Robert Heinlein wrote a lot about bisexual and androgynous characters in his books from the 60s and the 70s. And people have been doing this for a long time. And one of the things I'm interested in recently have been questioning is this idea that androids have gender. Like, why? Why do androids have to have gender? You know, they're not reproducing. And some people say, oh, it's because we're used to gender. We want to see robots that look like humans. And if they don't have a gender, we're uncomfortable, blah, blah. Well, you know what? We can be uncomfortable. We've got lots of robots that don't look human doing lots of things.
Well, have you seen the movie Ex Machina?
I haven't, no.
It's an amazing sci-fi movie, and it has to do with robots and the test to find out if they are true AI, if they can recognize themselves as an individual and things like that. a very, very impressive movie. And in it, the robot has it has the female persona and a very pleasing, figure and everything. And part of the reason for that was because the creator of the robot wanted to uh, make it a challenge for the man that was testing her intelligence over a period of a couple weeks to make her make it a her to kind of throw him off, I guess. It was a very interesting movie. But
Wow, I have to see if I can get that from the library or something. That sounds interesting. And Melita is chiming in on our other topic back a few spaces where you said, well, what if I have a character that I changed from male to female and then she wakes up and needs to see a urologist? And Melita points out that there are plenty of girls and women self-identified who still have penises or who were born with penises who might need to see a urologist. So
very true.
Just wanted to point that out. And that's very important. And she loves the idea of changing all the pronouns in a piece of writing to see if the writing still works.
That would be a really interesting thing. I think we should try that. I'm really interested to see how that would work. You have to kind of do that without thinking too much about it when you write the story. So maybe just grab an old story and change everything that way.
Well, that's what's so great about word processors now is you can do that global change and it'll just happen in like 2 seconds. All the he's become she's, all the hims become hers, and then that's it. You're done. You might not even change the name if you give them an androgynous name like Robin or Jordan, or there's plenty of androgynous names that nobody would assume anything about. And then, there you go, right?
Very true. Very true.
And you could have a lot of names. You could have a whole list of names that, at least in English, are not considered predominantly male or female.
So you've listed your pet peeves or you listed the major one, well, major one and a couple minor ones. But what would be your advice for a male writer that is trying to write a female heroine for a character? Well,
the stupidest thing I ever heard, and I wish I could remember which writer I'm trying to paraphrase, said something. He's a very famous writer too. And I'll have to look this up after we're finished talking and put it on the event page and on the YouTube page. But one of the writers that writes a lot of characters says when he writes female characters, he does everything the same except he makes them stupider. And he takes out logic, I think is what he said.
I've heard that before, and I'm trying to remember who it was.
I can't remember who said it either, but I'm just thinking that's ridiculous, number one. And number two, it's offensive. But it's also kind of funny because that's his concept of the difference between men and women, is that women are less logical, which is ridiculous. If you've ever tried to have a conversation with some men are completely irrational and don't even know what logic is, and some women are brilliant logicians. So anyway, that was just interesting. And I guess what I would say that's a piece of advice for anyone, male or female, writing a female character is not to be too hung up on concepts of femininity, not to make stereotypes the way you do it. Every female doesn't wear makeup. Every female is not obsessed with how she looks. Every female doesn't care about shoes. Every female's not a shopper. Every female doesn't have this list of things they concern themselves with or obsess about, and isn't going to be self-concept obsessed. So if those are the women you're always writing, you're making a big mistake, because plenty of us are not like that. Well, and that's the same pet peeve I have with trans men who want to be women, transvestites in particular, or drag queens, because they take the most ridiculous, extreme characteristics of women sometimes, and those are the only ones they wear. They wear a ton of makeup and they wear a ton of perfume. And if they're going to be a drag queen, they have to be beautiful by this standard. And it's just this whole thing of just all the worst parts, I think, of being a woman are what some of these men want to become. And I just want to take them aside and say, honey, there are lots of ways to be a woman, and you don't have to wear those high heels. Those high heels are going to kill your feet, right?
Well,
they're not asking me.
Well, honestly, the only thing that we see is what's on the outside. So it's a very surface change for things like that. I mean, it'd be very difficult for you to strip away everything that is visually identifiable as female and male and discern which one is which.
Good idea, though. Let's do that. Let's all live in a gender-free appearance society, and let's not call each other by gendered pronouns, and let's see how we do. I would love that.
That'd be a very interesting society.
It would be liberating for a lot of people.
Maybe we'd even forget what gender we are ourselves.
Well, it shouldn't matter unless you're having a child.
Very true. Very true.
With your own body or trying to make one. It shouldn't matter at all. Why should it matter?
Well, you know, it's funny though, because sci-fi is especially a great realm for transgender characters and things of the such, because it is a very forward-thinking genre, always has been, and not just in the realm of technology, but in society and culture. There's been a lot of really great writers that have brought forth a lot of social change just by writing a story.
Right. We're the only ones allowed to speak freely about the so-called future, because otherwise then it's not literature anymore. Then it's not regular fiction. As soon as you talk about the imaginary future, you're automatically relegated to speculative fiction shelves, whether it's sci-fi or fantasy or some other kind of speculative fiction. So I think that's important to recognize that regular writing, so-called, isn't allowed to talk about the distant future or an imaginary future.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah, we are. We do it very freely.
We do. And speaking of the imagined future, I just want to put in a plug for this thing we talked about earlier, which is naming the exoplanets.
Yes.
And I think it's very important to know that everyone gets to vote, and the voting's not over yet. And I put up some things on my website, and you can go looking for them. This is happening through a Japanese astronomical society organizing it, but it's global. Anyone can vote. You can vote more than once on the same computer if you fill out a form. Like if you and your wife share a computer, you can each vote, but you fill out a form to show that you're different people. But if you're only using one computer per vote, you just vote. And it's really interesting because they have a lot of different solar systems, and you get to name the sun and all the up till now identified planets of that system. And they let you know how big they are in relation to our planet or other planets of similar size in our system. So you have a sense of, you know, where they fit in our own understanding. And then other than that, it's anything goes. I mean, they've put up names of authors. They've put up mythological characters from about 50 different cultures. They've put up modern people like scientists. They've put up all different kinds of names of things like plants, trees, flowers, rocks, anything you could think of. And then they give their justification for it. So when you go in to vote, you can see what all the nominations are, and then you can decide.
Yeah, it is very interesting. I like the idea that they want to name the planets, but part of me also feels like it's a little egotistical for us as humans to just go around and naming planets. I mean, if we stumble across
presumptuous is the word you're looking for.
Yes, that's exactly the word. Well, because if you think about it, that'd be like me coming by your house and saying, you're called Henry, and then just walking away.
If you're right, and a lot of people are right about the fact that there is intelligent life on these other orbs, I'm sure we'll hear about it.
Yeah, they'll write us a very long letter and let us know how wrong we were. Right. And that their planet isn't called Petunia, but it's called something else.
Exactly. And that'll be fun. Then we'll have to go around changing the names of everything, which will be great. There's a huge controversy right now about a mountain in Alaska that's having that exact controversy because they named it McKinley or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And the natives, they already had a name for it, and they want to put that name back on it.
Oh, yeah. And I totally agree with that. I mean, it's especially considering the amount of, it seems like we're embracing cultures that we have come across a little late, but it's important to embrace them wholly, especially since it's not really, I mean, is there a lot of U.S. civilization around Mount McKinley? Like, is there a city at the base of it, or?
Well, it's Alaska, which we claimed as a state about, 70 years ago or whatever, 60 years ago. And so that's our claim, the United States claim, but it's specious at best and illegal and ridiculous. And we should just give up at least the naming, since we're not going to give up the state, you know?
It's not that big of a deal. I mean, like if they want to, I mean, it's something that they've had in their culture for so long. And for the most part, the Americans that are up there are transplants. I mean, some have been there for generations, but
they're all transplant.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
the Russians might not be as much transplants, though. The Russians have been there longer.
Oh,
But
very
yeah,
true.
and there's some
All
Canadians.
degree, all degree.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but we change the name of roads constantly. Like here in Columbus, they have Championship Boulevard or Champions Boulevard, one of the two. But I mean, and they do that on a regular basis just to pay tribute to like the football team or a politician and things like that. But it always reverts back to what it was before. So I don't see
Well,
why
this is
not.
a perfect segue into this is a quarter of the hour. It's a little past a quarter of the hour.
Sure.
Time for my big question about changes, which,
Okay.
as everyone who's listening knows, is the name of this show, Changes. And I always ask every author who visits with me the same question, which is, given all the local, personal, regional, or state, national, global, climatic, environmental, scientific, artistic, technological, religious, spiritual, artistic, any other kinds of changes you're aware of, which ones arouse in you hope, which ones evoke fear, what are the changes you'd like to talk about? Take it away, Michael McVey.
Well, I guess what really brings hope up for me is social change that's going on. Social and environmental stuff it's very exciting, and it's good to see that a lot of people are recognizing uh, environmental change and global warming or climate change, whatever you want to call it, is actually going on. I mean, it's cyclical, but it's still happening, and it's something that we could try to, you know, not speed up anymore. But and I guess it's same side. It's also the fear thing. I mean, you'd like to think that we're leaving this world for the future generations in a pretty good, standing, but we're really, kind of on the border of not doing that. Um, but yeah, and diplomacy around the world with the U.S. is, I just want the world to be just stop bickering about everything big and small, and sit down at tables and talk things out a little bit more clearly. And because we've come a long way as a civilization, humans on this planet, and it's just I feel like when it comes to things like arguments, we always revert back to the barbaric idea of like war is the first answer. And so there's just a lot of things that I think about when I think about change and where this planet is going. We need to stop thinking about it as countries and states, but more as just as a planet, where this planet is going, which I know scares a lot of people because it brings around the idea of a new world order and one planetary government. But we're not going to get along as long as we have these dividing lines amongst us, and religion, race, gender, language. There's so many different dividing lines between us as people of this earth, and we need to just get beyond that. That's the kind of thing I want to see in the future.
You bring up some really good points that I address in my Spanish series, because I write a utopian future in my series and have a lot of these issues resolving themselves through the 5 years that Earth is becoming a member of the Many Worlds Collective, with help from the aliens.
Yes, and that's one of those things that when I read the description of the book, I was really excited because it's it's definitely something that the world needs to look at. And I guarantee you that if there is intelligent life out there on any planet, it's out there on a few different planets, and hopefully they have started something like the MWC, because the same problems we face here on Earth would be faced out there as well. Different things.
Well, it's assuming that intelligent life is similar across many kinds of cultures and physical existences. I'm not sure it is. There's been a lot of evidence lately that people are putting forward that some signs of intelligent life that we're looking for shouldn't be limiting ourselves to carbon-based life.
Mm-hmm. That's one of those things that I guess Stephen Hawking talked about in Into the Universe, and that was a really interesting series to watch, and but he talked about what he thought life would be like on other planets, and named a couple planets with different types of atmospheres to describe what type of life there might be.
Hmm.
We only think of carbon-based life forms because that's the kind of life forms that we are, and that's the life forms we see here. But that's because carbon is one of the major elements right here on Earth. But it's not that way everywhere. So we have to think outside the box, as people say.
Right, right. So tell us some more about what's coming up for you, where you're going to be seen, what you're going to be releasing or doing in your writing.
Well, right now my big project is I'm going to be at Wizard World Con when it comes into Columbus, Ohio on the weekend of September 18th through the 20th. Really excited. William Shatner is going to be there, and Lou Ferrigno is going to be there.
So let
a
me
lot of
just
great
stop out
artists.
for a minute for people
Sure.
who don't know because they're too young or not from the United
The
States.
Incredible Hulk.
William Shatner played the very first captain on the TV series Star Trek and became a cult hero and has been in a lot of publicity. He also was on other TV shows and movies after that, but in this case, that's what he's known for. And Lou Ferrigno is an actor also who played the Hulk version of the Hulk in the TV show that was first on, I guess in the 70s, was it?
I believe it started maybe it was the 70s. But
I think it was.
I hate to nerd out on you, but actually Captain Kirk wasn't the first captain in the TV show. There was
Really?
The pilot episode had Captain Christopher Pike.
Oh, you're right. You're right. And then he died. Very good.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. Very interesting little side note. But yeah, there's going to be some really great artists out there and other writers, both of comics and of books. And I'm really excited to be there, meeting people. So anybody who happens to be in Columbus, Ohio, or in Ohio in general, swing on by. There's going to be huge turnout, I'm hoping. And
good. Well, I put the information up and the URL and everything on the event page on Google Plus for this show. Great. So people can go there and read more about you. They can read the prologue for your novel, which is called Plot on Sleepless Giants.
Yep.
And the name of your character, would you pronounce that, please?
Sure. It's Tamelephis.
Tamelephis.
Yes.
Okay. And you created that based on some Greek roots, I imagine?
Yes. I took the Greek word for time, which was teme. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but then elephas, the Latin word for elephant, because there is no Greek word for elephant, or at least there's no, ancient.
Because they never saw any.
They never saw any, exactly. But
all right, good.
The Romans saw a lot of elephants in their, outward motion that they took towards the
good. East. And then I also put up all your website URLs, your Facebook URL, your Twitter handle. So people can find Michael McVey everywhere he appears online and find out more about you, read up on your short stories, or get your novel on any of a lot of online vendors. And then you're working on a second novel. Is that true?
Yes, I'm working on a second book right now. It's not a sequel, but it involves. I like using mythology, which is why talking about stuff is great. But I like using mythology, and this next book involves a lot of Egyptian mythology and Egyptian gods, but it's a contemporary fantasy as well. It takes place in the modern world, and it should be interesting. And it does have a very strong female lead character, so I'm hoping. I'm kind of pressing you for information. I want to make sure I make you happy with this, Sally.
Do you know who Rick Riordan is?
Rick Riordan? No.
Rick Riordan is a YA middle grade author who's become quite well known because he has two different series that are very popular. One is based on Greek and Roman mythology and has had some movies made of it that has a lead character named Percy Jackson. So there's a movie, Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief and the Sea of Demons and blah, blah, blah. Well, he also has another series where the whole basis is Egyptian mythology. So you really should check that out.
I'm going to have to check that out.
And both of those series have a duo, a male-female duo of, young teenager age when they start, and then they get older as it goes along. So I think you might enjoy looking to see what he's done, because he brings the Egyptian mythology right into the modern world, the way he did with the Greek and Roman mythology in the first series. But he keeps, I think, a lot of the traditional concepts and names and all that kind of stuff. So quite a lot of research, obviously, you'll both be doing.
And there's multiple names for a lot of the Egyptian gods and
I'm
goddesses.
sure. I'm sure. So we only have a few minutes left. I'm sorry to say this hour always just flies by, and we never have enough time to talk about everything. But I need to do my closing out the show kinds of stuff, which is to remind everyone that this is called Changes, Conversations Between Authors. I'm Sally Ember, EDD, and you can find me and every episode of Changes that's already happening, already happened, I mean, and that is about to happen on my Changes page on my website. You can find information about my Spanners science fiction multiverse series, which has a lot of romance, on my website. And you can find my blog posts, which are fascinating, if I might say so. And that is sallyember.com, SALLYEMBER, like a burning ember, sallyember.com. And you can also find me on Google Plus and Twitter and Facebook and lots of other places. And Melita is reminding me before we end that Rick Riordan is very prolific and also has an adult mystery series, which I didn't know. Thank you, Melita. So yeah, he is just an incredible writer. He's probably written about 40 books by now. It's just ridiculous. But thank you for telling us that, Melita, and thank you for being here today and interacting with us. And I also want to remind people that next week I have the special privilege of having a great nonfiction author and psychodramatist and sociodramatist and a very creative playwright, songwriter, and just lots of other things about him that I can't even tell you yet because I want you to tune in. Longtime friend of mine. We met in 1978. We worked together for decades. So this is the first time I get to have someone on my show who is a really close personal friend, and he is flying to St. Louis to be on the show and sit right next to me right here. So his name is Mario Casa, C-O-S-S-A, and he's going to be on September 2nd. And on September 9th, I have a person I don't know yet who's going to be on the show, and her name is Robin Andrew. I'm really excited. R.L. Andrew is her writer's name. And I also have some great guests coming up later. Bocara Brumley is coming up later in September. But starting September 30th, I have openings. So if you are an author or you know anyone who is a blogger or a writer of any kind, nonfiction, fiction, playwriting, screenwriting, poetry, I don't care. If you're any kind of writer and you'd like to be on the show, or you know someone who might really enjoy being on this show, it's just a free-flowing conversation. It is not an interview. So that's not to say interviews are bad, but this is not one. Please have them contact me at sallyember@yahoo.com or go to my website and follow all the directions about how to get on my show, sallyember.com. So that is the end of our show for today. Michael, do you want to say thank yous and goodbyes to anybody?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for watching it live, and for those watching on YouTube later, thank you very much. And thank you, Sally, for having me on. It's been a great, great time. Really great pleasure getting to know you better.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Melita. She's thanking us both for having a thought-provoking conversation because she says she always loves talking about writing and gender in particular. And so we made her day, I think, by having those topics in our conversation. And I want to thank everybody, as you did, Michael, who is going to watch today or any other day in the future, for doing that. Please write comments on the event page in Google Plus or on the YouTube page, and we will respond. Or contact us on our website, McVey, MCVEY.com and sallyember.com. And thank you to everybody who does tune into Google Plus Hangouts on the air and YouTube. And as I always say at the end, go well with your changes. Bye-bye.
Bye.